What's happening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second episode in this mini-series I am producing over the course of this week, covering the basics of how to get started and gain experience in the production side of Overwatch Esports. If you haven't already seen the introductory video to this series and are curious about who these videos are for and what my qualifications are for discussing these matters, I would recommend you go check that out first. Also, if you are more interested in play-by-play casting, I would recommend the video that came out on Monday, both of which can be found in the series playlist in the description below. Anyway, let's get to the main topic for today. Color casting. Often overlooked in favor of the more explosive entertainment that goes along with play-by-play, color casting is equally as essential to the broadcast in filling out the major pieces of information. Primarily as the color caster, you will be focusing on analyzing plays that happened, giving the audience a rundown of what the teams are playing and why, and pointing out any important pieces of information that play-by-play couldn't get to during their narration of the fight. Some popular examples of color casters in the Overwatch League would be Wolf, Jake, and Hexagrams. At first glance, acting as the real-time analyst might sound easy if you naturally have an analytical mind, and to some degree it can be, but there's also a lot of work that goes into it. It's not just knowing the information that's important, but also knowing what is going to be relevant in upcoming fights, communicating that to the viewers without sounding like a complete robot, and most crucially of all, presenting it in a way that's still entertaining. In a way, you have to be able to teach people about the intricacies of Overwatch without them ever realizing that they're learning. Before I get into the specific aspects of what goes into making a good color caster, I would like to put the disclaimer out there that this video will share many of the same topics as the play-by-play casting video that came out 2 days ago. You'll have to forgive me if it sounds like I'm repeating myself if you happen to watch both, but these two styles of casting are entwined by nature, and many of the concepts carry over from one to the other. So in favor of keeping this video and the previous one as their own separate entities, I'm going to end up restating anything that also happens to be relevant for color casting. Okay? Good. You may be surprised to learn that as a caster, your job starts before you ever join the casting booth. Once you are assigned to a match, I would highly recommend that you take the time to research a bit about the teams and the players you'll be covering. It doesn't have to be an insane amount of work putting into this aspect of your cast. You don't need to look up the entire histories of their franchises. Basic information like how to pronounce the player names, what pronouns they identify with, tournament standings, and etc. are pretty much the gist of what you should take note of. Believe me when I say you will earn a lot of good graces from players if you are visibly putting in the effort to pronounce their names correctly on stream. Some tournaments will provide their production crews with a registry that lists such information. However, if they don't, you can simply ask the teams themselves prior to the game starting. Depending on who you're casting for, you may be in the game lobby yourself, or you can just ask. But if you're not, then just ask the lobby host to figure it out for you. It's such a low effort action that matters a lot to most players, so there's really no excuse not to. Once you get the stream underway, you want to be paying close attention to the smaller details of what's going on, especially if your play-by-play caster isn't pointing it out during the action itself. You are the real-time analyst in a sense, and while you aren't expected to write the next big thesis on the Overwatch meta, you will be expected to explain the finer points of what's going on in the game you're covering. This can range from ult economies to team coordination, and even something as simple as positioning. It's more than likely that you'll be covering each of these topics and many more throughout the broadcast. Just make sure not to harp on one point for too long. It can get boring to the viewers if the only discussion being given is how many more ultimates one team has over the other. Make sure to provide a diverse range of topics each time the floor is yours, and this can be as broad as team-wide stats or as specific as how a particular player is getting away with risky plays. While your script isn't going to be written for you in real time like it is the play-by-play caster, you shouldn't ever run out of topics to bring up so long as you're paying attention. While it is great to have a deeper understanding of the higher level of play that top-tier Overwatch can offer, you do want to make sure that you're not getting too abstract with the points you're bringing up, or at least don't do that right off the bat. You are allowed to assume that your audience has a basic understanding of what Overwatch is and how it plays, but you shouldn't assume that they know every intricacy of how the current meta works and what teams are trying to do in your game. Work your way up to the more difficult details over the course of the game, even if it takes multiple maps to lay the foundation for what you're trying to say. It would be just a little bit confusing to the average viewer if you started off the first map discussing how teams are going to want to use their ultimates before the fighting has even begun. Using the example I just gave, you'd want to wait until a team actually has an ult combo online and ready so that you can go on to explain how they probably want to use it and what their end goal is. From there, the viewers will have an actual example for what you're talking about, allowing you to build off that knowledge moving forward. Adding on to that point even further, it's important to point out when your predictions were wrong and explain what happened instead of what you were expecting. Oftentimes you may be right when analyzing what the most common action from a team would be, but that doesn't mean the players are going to follow your guesswork. Taking the time to point out and analyze what and why a team did something different is going to be the easiest way to retain the audience's trust in your analysis despite wrongly predicting what might happen next. If you've also watched the video about play-by-play casting, this section will sound a lot similar for the most part, as the concept of attitude transcends through every form of casting. If you have aspirations of actually making it anywhere in esports production, regardless of the game you're covering, you're going to need to be pleasant to work with. That means being able to control what you say and how you present yourself in all facets of your public life, especially on broadcast. One of the quickest ways to be booted out of a production crew and blacklisted is to show off your poor behavior on stream. This can include, but is not limited to, excessive profanity, arguing, or just coming off as rude in general. Pretty much every single production crew I've ever seen has a handbook or a guide for what you can and can't do on stream, so you should quite literally have it spelled out for you wherever you go. Smaller communities are often more lenient about what you can and can't get away with, but if you start getting involved with actual companies that offer unpaid gigs to gain experience, there aren't many second chances for jeopardizing their business with lousy behavior. Aside from the usual cursing or whatnot on stream, you should also make sure that you're being respectful to the teams and players at all times. There's nothing quite like constantly calling someone bad to instantly burn any bridge you may have had with that team. Building connections to not just others in the esports production sphere, but the entirety of esports in general is absolutely crucial for getting your name out there when looking for new casting opportunities. If the owner of a team is peeved that you were disrespectful to their players during a broadcast, you better believe that word will spread to any and every production crew you might want to work with. The Too Lazy Didn't Read is essentially, if you act like a normal human being instead of an asshat, more people will want to work with you. Speaking of working with people, you're going to need to be doing a lot of that if you want to cast games. Believe it or not, you probably won't be allowed to host, stream, and cast games all by yourself. Not that you'd want to do that in the first place. Generally, you're going to be working with a crew of around 3 to 5 other individuals depending on any given broadcaster. You will, of course, be alongside a play-by-play caster, but there should also be a lobby host to deal with any in-game settings that need changing throughout the series, and a producer to deal with the stream overlays and give you information when needed. There may also be some observers separate from the producer to act as camera people for different angles. You're going to want to be communicating with the entire crew you'll be working with for any given stream in order to make sure everything can go as smoothly as possible. The last thing you want is for a problem to arise because you didn't tell someone something they needed to know. At the very least, you should be taking the time to meet with your fellow caster and see how you two want to work off each other. Over time, you may develop a dedicated casting duo, but assuming for now you're just running solo and pairing up with random casters, you'll want to get a feel for each other's styles before you're on the air. The producer of your game should be the one providing you with any information and documents you might need going into the broadcast, such as the aforementioned player registry with name pronunciations and whatnot. They'll also be the ones to tell you when you're on and off the air so that you're not sitting there wondering if the stream can hear you talking. Most importantly, the producer may occasionally whisper something in the voice chat about information that is vitally important. This can be anything from the reason for a pause to call to speed up the transition to the next section of the stream, or basically any other technical difficulty you can think of. If you do happen to work with a production crew that utilizes multiple observers, odds are you won't be in the game lobby yourself, but rather viewing the live feeds as they are sent to the stream. In cases like these, you should talk with people operating the cameras to make sure they know what kind of action you like to talk over, and you know what kind of angles they like to get. The more you talk with the people you work with, the less problems are likely to arise midstream. Moving over to when you're actually in the game itself, there is going to be an important dynamic to when you should be chiming in with your analysis. The play-by-play caster will be talking over most of the action, and generally during this time you should be simply observing the game. You may chime in with the occasional exclamation if something happens, but definitely don't start talking over your fellow caster while the fight is still going on. Once the action stops, the play-by-play will ideally be finishing up their narration within the next sentence or two, and you should be getting ready to start your piece. You're only going to have a brief period between the fights to talk about whatever analysis you have, so make sure to be concise and clear. One of the worst things you can do is continue analyzing once the next fight has already begun, because the audience no longer cares about what happened as much as what is currently happening. By their very nature, higher level games will have less time in between fights as the teams ready themselves for their next engagements, and that's just something you'll have to get used to. As funny as it would be in theory, you can't ask the players to slow down so that you can get your 2 cents in. For this reason, I would recommend starting off by color casting lower elo games first, just to make sure you can have good practice analyzing before you start working on your speed. There will be rare occasions where the play-by-play caster has to go silent for whatever reason. Maybe the fight is going on forever and they need a break, or maybe they inhaled some saliva. The reason doesn't really matter. If there's ever a time in the broadcast that you you have a few seconds of awkward silence where you aren't sure if the other caster is going to continue, it will be your job to briefly step in to make sure that the action doesn't go unnarrated. Once you're sure the play-by-play is ready to resume their job, just quickly hand it off to them to return to the normal flow. Speaking of handing it off to your fellow caster, this is an art in itself. What I would recommend is that you end your final sentence with your casting partner's username so they know you're done talking. As you gain more experience, you'll begin to understand what the end of a sentence sounds like, but as you're starting out, it's totally fine to use this trick for as long as you need it. Hell, you even hear it being used in the Overwatch League from time to time. Just as important as what you're saying when you're giving your analysis, you want to be careful in how you're saying it as well. For one, don't be that monotone college professor that puts the entire class to sleep. This is supposed to be a broadcast for entertainment, not pure education. That's more of a side thing. More than that, however, you'll want to try to match your tone to the play-by-play caster to keep everything as consistent as possible. Not every game of Overwatch is going to be a nail-biter, and that's fine. You're allowed to take a more relaxed approach in discussing a game that's relatively one-sided. Just make sure it doesn't come off as apathy for what's going on. You're still expected to take the game seriously, regardless of how much of a stomp it is. Likewise, if you're going into the final tiebreaker of a Map 7 Grand Final series, you want to be hyped up just like everyone else. Don't allow your delivery of the commentary to suffer due to your excitement, however. You still do need to be clear and concise in how you say what you say. It can be incredibly easy to lose yourself in the action and get caught up to the point where you're barely coherent anymore. I've seen it happen. This specific example I have for you is from Season 1 of League Zero during the playoffs, meaning this clip is from around August of 2019. I find it's a good example of letting the hype get to you a little too much and allowing the cast to suffer as a result.
And there's no support on the guy that, and Blackshot's gonna make the dream happen! Blackshot is so close to winning this! Oh my god! They have somebody else to work helping us here, but with Jeff Dane dropping so waste his anti right now. The ult is there to keep out. Deeper just gonna waste, Deeper just gonna GMS, but Jeff Dane! Blackshot is gonna do it! And they take down Bumper! Get this air booty! Blackshot's going to the finals!
To his credit, this caster has improved quite a bit in the roughly 18 months since this game was streamed, but the point still remains. The context behind this clip is that Platchat, the team that won, had just completed their second upset in a row for their playoffs run. After having gone 1-9 in the regular season, they turned around and defeated the third, second, and eventually first place seed to claim one of the craziest championships League Zero has ever witnessed. This particular moment is from the semifinals match against the second seed. It's fine and actually expected to show some excitement for a great game like this, but you also want to make sure that the quality of your cast doesn't suffer. The viewers should always be able to understand what you're saying, otherwise there's not really any reason to have the game casted in the first place. Be conscious of overexcitement as well. However, this will be a lot easier for you compared to the play-by-play, as you won't be talking directly over the action like they are. That being said, it is your job to be the realist of the broadcast crew. If a game is looking one-sided, you're allowed to call that out. Just be careful about not coming off as too rude or biased when giving off any kind of analysis. Stick to the facts when predicting match outcomes, like pointing out how daunting of a task it would be for a team to come back after going down in a series. At the end of a game, for most production crews you'll work with, they'll ask you to conduct a post-match interview with someone from the winning team. Generally, this will be told to you before the stream goes live whether or not this is expected of you, but if you aren't, there's no harm in asking. Personally, I've found the most success when asking the teams themselves who they would like to interview for them, rather than asking someone specific. Not everyone is comfortable talking on livestream, meaning that you might have a difficult time finding a worthwhile conversation out of them. Someone volunteering for it at least is someone that you know is willing to talk for a bit. Once the designated team rep is in the voice call with you, you'll want to keep it relatively brief. 2 questions per caster is a good maximum to work with in terms of time commitment. Remember that this person you're interviewing just played or coached for an entire series and are likely getting tired by that point, so try not to waste their time too much. The play-by-play caster will probably be keeping the more general questions to himself, and will start off the interview, meaning you'll have a little bit more time to think about what you want to ask. You're the analyst of the stream, so it's more of your job to come up with something to ask that's more in-depth than the usual. So, how do you think it went? Once you've asked your piece and exhausted the time you have for the interview, make sure to congratulate the team representative on their win one last time before letting them go, after which the floor will be handed over to whichever caster is going to do the sign-off to the broadcast. Much like everything else, this should be coordinated before the stream itself, so you know exactly who needs to step in at the time. Then you'll just have to wait for the word from the producer to give the okay that you're off the air before you're good to talk again. It's during this time after the broadcast that I would highly recommend sticking around to discuss with the rest of the crew how you all think the show went. This is going to be the best way for you to get the highest quality feedback on your performance. So, to reiterate all the major points we've covered about the basics of color casting, present your analysis in a way that's entertaining to the audience and fair to the teams playing, keep a neutral and friendly attitude about your work, consistently communicate with the rest of your broadcast team to make sure everything goes as smoothly as possible, take the time to keep your tone in line with the action that's happening, and finally wrap up the end of each broadcast quickly and efficiently. There are a lot more aspects that go into becoming a great color caster than what was covered in this video, but those are best learned through experience rather than through a lecture. As you get out there and become involved in casting, you'll start to notice how every production crew does things a little bit differently from everyone else. Most of the good crews will have manuals to give the basics of what they expect out of you, and I've never met a production head that doesn't like to answer questions. In terms of where you can go to start your casting endeavors, there's quite a few smaller communities and tournaments that are always looking for more people to join their production crews. Some of the better ones I've encountered would be Flux Cup, Owlets, and the crew I run in League Zero. Fair warning about that last one, we are a little bit more strict about the quality of people we look for. If you still need some work before moving up to casting on stream, we may give you the caster in training role to allow you to work on your presentation first. Once you do start to gain experience, and if you want to move up to the possibility of paid casting gigs, there are some legitimate companies like Elo Hell, Monkey Bubble, and Reflash that occasionally post openings for casters, though keep in mind that these positions are the start of where you'll really have to buckle down if you want to catch a big break. There is one more group that I'd like to draw your attention to, though this one is more of a Discord community than a production crew on its own. They're called Broadcast.gg, and they cater to esports production in general. There's hundreds of members there, ranging from first-timers just like you to bona fide professionals who've casted some of the biggest stages in the world. There's tons of resources there to help you, and the admins of the Discord occasionally host workshops to help you improve. If you're looking for a place to get started, they're probably your best resource. I'll have the links to the smaller communities as well as Broadcast.gg in the description, as well as the timestamps to each individual section in case you want a refresher on just one specific part. This might sound overwhelming, but I promise it's actually pretty easy when it's put into practice. If you have any questions about something you feel I missed, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll try my best to get back to you in a reasonable amount of time. Anyways, that's all I've really got for the basics of color casting. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you find that you're more interested in play-by-play casting, that video can be found in the playlist for this series linked in the description. The third and final video for this series will be about streaming/observing, and that will be coming out this Friday at noon EST, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. I'm gonna end it now so I don't end up rambling, so until next time, don't die.